За сайн байцгаана уу? Өнөөдөр хэвлэлээ Cambridge 14-ийн reading test 2-ын passage 1-ийг уншийе. За. Back to the future of skyscraper design. Answers to the problem of excessive electricity use by skyscrapers and large public buildings can be found in ingenious but forgotten architectural designs of the 19th and the early 20th century. The Recovery of Natural Environments in Architecture by Professor Alan Short is the culmination of 30 years of research and award-winning green building design by Short and colleagues in architecture, engineering, applied maths, and earth sciences at the University of Cambridge. The crisis in building design is already here, said Short. Policymakers think you can solve energy and building problems with gadgets. You can't. As global temperatures continue to rise, we are going to continue to squander more and more energy on keeping our buildings mechanically cool until we have run out of capacity. Short is calling for a sweeping reinvention of how skyscrapers and major public buildings are designed, to end the reliance on sealed buildings which exist solely via the life support system of vast air conditioning units. Instead, he shows it is entirely possible to accommodate natural ventilation and cooling in large buildings by looking into the past, before the widespread introduction of air conditioning systems, which were relentlessly and aggressively marketed by their inventors. Short points out that to make most contemporary buildings habitable, they have to be sealed and air conditioned. The energy use and carbon emissions this generates is spectacular and largely unnecessary. Buildings in the West account for 40 to 50% of electricity usage, generating substantial carbon emissions, and the rest of the world is catching up at a frightening rate. Short regards glass, steel, and air-conditioned skyscrapers as symbols of status rather than practical ways of meeting our requirements. Short's book highlights a developing and sophisticated art and science of ventilating buildings through the 19th and earlier 20th centuries, including the design of ingeniously ventilated hospitals. Of particular interest were those built to the design of John Shaw Billings, including the first Johns Hopkins Hospital in the U.S. city of Baltimore, 1873 to 1889. We spent 3 years digitally modeling Billings' final designs, says Short. We put pathogens in the airstreams, modeled for someone with tuberculosis, coughing in the wards, and we found the ventilation system in the room would have kept other patients safe from harm. We discovered that 19th century hospital wards could generate up to 24 air changes an hour. That's similar to the performance of a modern-day computer-controlled operating theater. We believe you could build wards based on these principles now. Single rooms are not appropriate for all patients. Communal wards appropriate for certain patients, older people with dementia, for example, would work just as well in today's hospitals at a fraction of the energy cost. Professor Short contends the mindset and skill set behind these designs have been completely lost, lamenting the disappearance of expertly designed theaters, opera houses, and other buildings where up to half of the volume of the building was given over to ensuring everyone got fresh air. Much of the ingenuity present in 19th century hospitals and building design was driven by a panicked public clamoring for buildings that could protect against what was thought to be the lethal threat of miasmas, toxic air that spread disease. Miasmas were feared as the principal agent of disease and epidemics for centuries and were used to explain the spread of infection from the Middle Ages right through the cholera outbreaks in London and Paris during the 1850s. Foul air, rather than germs, was believed to be the main driver of hospital fever, leading to disease and frequent death. The prosperous steered clear of hospitals, while miasma theory has been long since disapproved. Short has for the last 30 years advocated a return to some of the building's design principles produced in its wake. Today, huge amounts of a building's space and construction cost are given over to air conditioning. But I have designed and built a series of buildings over the past 3 decades which have tried to invent some of these ideas and then measure what happens. To go forward into our new low energy, low carbon future, we would be well advised to look back at design before our high energy, high carbon present appeared. What is surprising is what a rich legacy we have abandoned. Successful examples of Short's approach includes the Queen's Building at De Montfort University in Leicester, containing as many as 2,000 staff and students. The entire building is naturally ventilated, passively cooled, and naturally lit, including the two largest auditoria, each seating more than 150 people. The award-winning building uses a fraction of the electricity of comparable buildings in the UK. Short contends that glass skyscrapers in London and around the world will become a liability over the next 20 or 30 years if climate modeling predictions and energy price rises come to pass as expected. He is convinced that sufficiently cooled skyscrapers using the natural environment can be produced in almost any climate. He and his team have worked on a hybrid buildings in the harsh climates of Beijing and Chicago, built with natural ventilation, assisted by backup air conditioning, which surprisingly perhaps can be switched off more than half the time on milder days and during the spring and autumn. Short looks at how we might reimagine the cities, offices, and homes of the future. Maybe it is time we changed our outlook. За баярлалаа. Доор хаяж 3 удаа сонсоорой.